I want to start recapping a little of week 4 just by asking a question again that we asked a lot before the season gets started. And that was, what would the Chiefs look like without Tyreek Hill? Well, the early returns are really good. Last night, there are certain games, and I don't know that it meant as much for Tampa at home as it did for Kansas City to go on the road. And, the final score, you can play with that weeks removed. You're like, oh, that was kind of a competitive game. And yeah, maybe if Tampa doesn't start by immediately giving the Chiefs an early touchdown, and next thing you know, you look up, it's 21-0. Maybe that game could have gone a different way. Tampa threw it a million times. That was a record for Brady pass attempts in a row in a game over his entire career, which is saying something because the guy's been playing for a long time. But when you look at the Chiefs offense, you can look at the Mahomes part of this. He's number 1 in QBR, although QBR can always be a difficult dance because you'll be like, man, the guy I like is high in QBR. And you're like, oh, the guy I don't like is also really high in QBR. But when you start adding up all the things, he's tied for the most touchdowns, only 2 picks. He's only been sacked 5 times for the quarterbacks that have actually played the majority of the games, right? 5 is pretty much on the lower end. I think the only one lower than that is 4. There's some guys that don't play as much that obviously are lower. He's number 1 in quarterback expected points added. 6 different players have a touchdown. And when you watch it, right, the real simple part of this is when you watch it, it doesn't look any different. Maybe the part where you're going to take a couple shots with Hill once a quarter. Maybe the part where the underneath throws are there. And that was kind of the weird thing for Mahomes at the beginning of last year. And what was going on? It was like, how come he's not taking what he's being given? Why is he forcing it to Hill? There was even some thoughts that maybe they would move on from Hill to force him to adjust to the way he was going to be defended. I think it's pretty simple. They didn't want to pay Hill what Hill was going to get paid, and he got that money with Miami. So he also was turning the football over a lot more than he normally would at the beginning half of last season. And some of them were very fluky. Like there's some guys that just can't help themselves. They're turning the ball over all the time, and they are later called backups. But for Mahomes, even though there's a few, like we expect so much of some of these guys that are at the very top of the game, but it was very weird that there seems to be this collection of just doubters for who Kansas City could be. Whether it was James Jones on with us, picking him to be last, Bart Scott writing him off as many times as he possibly could. The offense statistically is the same offense with Hill after a month. The difference is this front office also deserves a ton of credit revamping this entire defensive unit. They brought back less than 50% of the players that played snaps from last year. There's younger guys all over the place. Different isn't always better, but they had been on a really bad trend. And the things that they've needed to fix, it's pretty remarkable how good of a job this team does with it. They needed to fix the O-line after the Tampa Super Bowl. That was a mess. They fixed it. They needed to fix the defense after a pattern of 3 of the last 4 years just not being acceptable and Mahomes being good enough to carry it. Any team that had this kind of bad defense and early returns a month in, again, some of these teams are going to get hurt and they're going to be bad on defense again because they just don't have the bodies and don't have the depth. But for Kansas City, I think the whole thing has been really, really impressive. And all the AFC West talk, do you really want to pick a different team other than them now? A month into this, I mean, I guess you could still hang on to the Chargers part of it. I, too, love the Chargers' talent. Stop me if you've heard that one before. They're 2-2. Maybe it's not that big of a deal, but the Chargers have already had games 2 weeks ago where it felt like all their best players were missing from the game. I feel like the Chargers, if you go back 20 years, they've probably had the most games missed of their best players. That's just, don't know if it's true or not, just saying it out loud. But if you're looking at the other teams, Vegas finally getting a win in Denver, Vegas getting that win against Denver, you really want to start thinking that Kansas City wouldn't finish ahead of those teams? That seems impossible right now in a sport that can be really different month to month. Denver has 2 wins. It was funny because as that game got kicked off, the announcer was like, well, the offense isn't what you'd want, but they're winning games. Well, they beat Houston, who may be one of the 3 worst teams in the league, and they beat San Francisco by scoring 11 points. So, no, Denver's got serious problems, and Vegas was able to beat them yesterday. So, the AFC West, it's Kansas City's division. It's their division again. But I don't know. Maybe there's something else with the Mahomes thing, too, because there was a local columnist, and I don't know enough about every city's local columnists and who are the people that was basically like, he's a good quarterback, but ... It was all these other things. And all I could think of is if it's, again, I don't know the answer to this, but there's certain columnists that I grew up with that if they were to do the ultimate zag on the local guy, I'd be like, oh, he's He's just doing what a columnist does. That's what people used to do before they were on television. They would just go, all right, nobody said shit about me for like 8 months and I'm a columnist. I'm just going to have to stoke the fire with something. Mahomes, okay, I guess, like, can his brother be that annoying that we're going to start pretending that Patrick isn't awesome at quarterback? That would seem to be a reach. And on top of everything else, his contract, he could have made more. Look at the guaranteed money that's flowing around for quarterbacks that aren't nearly as good as him. I still can't believe the Kyler Murray guaranteed number. I can't believe that number. It was the second most ever until a more recent deal was done. So with Mahomes, and I don't expect that the team is going to use a contract that he signed long-term as leverage against him later on. You're like, oh, we have you. That's usually not how it works with quarterbacks. I don't think they're going to use it as leverage to keep his salary number down. But, I mean, this guy does everything. He does everything you could possibly want. And I was just surprised that people were willing to kind of move on. Not all, but enough people that are real, that have platforms, that were willing to move on from somebody because Tyreek Hill wasn't around. Keeping it moving here. So does that mean that Kansas City's now closer to Buffalo than we thought after a month? Buffalo was in danger of going 2-2 here. Difference being that when they lost to Miami, it felt real fluky because it was something that we hadn't seen since what it was 3 times since 1939. A team had run that few plays and still won a football game. So there was all sorts of outliers in that Miami game, but credit to Miami's defense, it was on the field for 41 minutes and still found a way to keep Buffalo out of the end zone. So if Buffalo had been 2-2, the classic reaction to that would have been everybody's preseason darlings, everybody's darlings the first 2 weeks because they smashed the Rams. They smashed Tennessee. That was 41-7. I'm watching them lose to Baltimore going, wait, isn't everybody supposed to score in Baltimore? And that wasn't really the case. So it felt like Baltimore's defense had turned itself around. Lamar, who was Offensive Player of the Month for the AFC, who has been terrific. And then it comes down to Harbaugh not wanting to go for the game-winning field goal because he wanted 7. Lamar gets picked off in the end zone. 2 great plays, one by the edge to keep Lamar a little more contained in this game. I thought Buffalo did a better job than I've seen other teams do it. And then getting some of that secondary back for Buffalo and Poyer with another pick back there. Just a couple nice plays. Poyer reading that one to the corner, and then Buffalo moves it down for the game-winning field goal and plays the clock the right way. But it's still, one loss record. I don't get too worked up about it when I was doing power rankings of radio. If we do it now, would I still have Buffalo 1? Yeah, probably. But I'd have Kansas City a lot closer to them. Would I have Kansas City over Philly? Yeah, I think that I would. I mean, Philly's defense and what they've done to some of these teams and them destroying Minnesota, who, by the way, is 3-1, which could be really easy to forget because you're like, oh, that's right, Cousins, somebody likes him. Remember when they played Philly? It was a mess. They couldn't defend. The receivers are wide open the entire game. You're like, yeah, look at the standings. Look where they're at right now. But as we know, the primetime game, when you suck in the primetime game, it lingers a lot longer. So it feels like Philly would be 3rd if I'm kind of doing power rankings here on the fly. I'd have Buffalo, I'd have KC. I know most people would have Philly 1 because they're undefeated. That's not how it works here. The defense is terrific. It's the number 3 defense in opposing yards per play. It was number 3 behind San Francisco and Buffalo in that stat. Also number 3 behind San Francisco and Buffalo in the DVOA stuff, some of the adjusted stuff. And that Jags win, as much as I point to Philly's schedule, as I will all season, is a reminder of let's not get too carried away as if they're the prohibitive. Like when somebody says Philly's the best team in the NFL, we'll ask Dill for this. I'm a little hesitant to go that far with it, probably because I just don't think of Hurts as the same as some of the other top quarterbacks, which is totally fair. But they're going to be favored in every single game. Well, based on who they are right now, the models show that they'd be favored every single game remaining, but they're down 14-0 to a Jacksonville team that it felt like all of us had kind of had this coming out party for this moment of, hey, like Jacksonville's good. Go watch Jacksonville. And after being down a couple touchdowns, it was all Philly. So I'd have them 3rd. I don't know what you do with the Rams. A little bit of a hangover there. And even though Tampa gave up 1,000,000 points, I still think Tampa's defense is going to be good. They have been the previous 3 games other than Kansas City. Last night was a mess, and I'm not going to doubt Tom Brady. Speaking of other things to doubt, though, the other thing with Tampa, too, is with not the defense. Julio Jones, Chris Godwin, and Evans have played together for 27 plays in 4 games. So you'd expect that to change. Of course, Brate went down. It was pretty clear he was banged up. Their tight end out of the game. He did come back in. Last thing here. I watched another full Arizona game. I don't know why I keep doing this, but I did. And, they win. They pull it out. It was 10-10 for much of the game. Baker, this isn't working. Like, I'm starting to get Sam Darnold updates on this high ankle sprain where he's going to be cleared, but he's going to be technically cleared to play, but he's not going to play because the ankle injury is still a problem for him. And it gets back to what we talked about before the season started, and that is, who are the first-round quarterbacks that change teams, and how often is that successful? Over a 10-year span of first-round draft picks at the quarterback position, we found 25 of them. 5 were no doubt franchise-changing players. 5 were total flameouts. And then there were 15 quarterbacks that got legitimate starts for multiple seasons and then ended up somewhere else, and almost none of them worked out. Tannehill's like the only success story. Jameis Winston, I was open to it because he had gotten hurt when he went to New Orleans. I'm still not sure that that's even accurate. Baker has been a disaster with Carolina. The offensive game that they gave you yesterday, you could argue that is the single worst offensive output of any team in any game so far this NFL season. So Baker is actually following along with what has happened historically. Big-time player, gets drafted high, team takes him, moves on. The next team's like, hey, that guy went really high. We kind of liked him. That team's stupid. Look what they did with their coaching staff. We'll fix him. Or, there's another version of it's like, hey, it's worth a flyer. We don't really have that many options. We just did it with Darnold, which is the exact same model. We might be getting rid of our coach. It sucks, too, for the coaches that are going to get fired. They shouldn't be allowed to wear those camo hats on the sideline. If you're going to win that camo hat or wear that, you gotta win, is the point. When you lose, it feels like the loss is like more than just a regular loss. It feels like an extra loss because then you got to walk over with this weird camo promotional hat, which, looks good on Brady, doesn't look as good on Matt Rule. That's science. But yeah, the Baker thing not working out and actually kind of following along with everything that we had talked about in the past.